Welcome to the K2 Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Karen Kelly. Every week, I'll be sitting down with a sales executive where they'll share their stories and experiences that produce game-changing results. Let's be honest, sales can be a tough game. I'm sure at some point, we've all delivered a less than stellar demo, been ghosted by a client or two, and sometimes maybe we did more talking than listening. And that's where I can help. The stories and insights our guests share can be applied to your own business, your territory, or with your team, so you're not reinventing the wheel. Our weekly tactics and strategies help you get out of your head and start creating your own path towards game-changing results. Welcome back to the K2 Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Karen Kelly. Now, how many of us have a big, audacious goal locked up in our brains? We have this feeling that we know that we have something to share with the world, but for whatever reason, we're not releasing it. And my guest today, Dr. Sarah Glova, is a recognized speaker, an entrepreneur, an instructor, a business consultant. She works with entrepreneurs as well as teams, and she helps them unlock what's holding us back. So whether it's fear, whether it's timing, whether it's just staying in motion all the time, whether we're playing small because we're allowing the voices around us to keep us down, to play small and play safe. And she teaches us to look inward and really do that inner work. And that spark, whatever that spark, that purpose, that why is within you, it's there for a reason. And it's going to tell a story that's going to leave you memorable and allow you to leave a mark in the world that you're going to be proud of. And so I encourage you to take a listen. If there's anyone on your team or in your business that you feel would benefit from this, that perhaps is playing safe, spinning their wheels in circles, share this with them. Download the one pager and allow yourself to get out of your head and into motion. And there's no better person to help you achieve this than Sarah. I had a great conversation. I learned a lot. I laughed a lot. And it definitely helped me. Think about when we're in motion and when we're spinning our tires and we're talking about things. And, if you dissect it close enough, it's excuses. And so what really is holding us back? And so when we can get a framework that holds us to one page, it allows us to really just get to the nitty gritty, get to the details, get to the need to have versus the nice to have, and ultimately take action, put something out there so we have no regrets. So let us know what you think, if you've implemented any of her strategies, her framework, and what results you were able to achieve from it. Thanks so much for listening, everybody, and we'll see you next time. And I am delighted to bring Dr. Sarah Glova to the podcast. Welcome to the podcast.
Delighted to be here. It's so fun, from the back of an Uber to your podcast. One of my favorite journeys. I love it.
You know what? I feel like there's synchronicities around if you're willing to take them. And so just quick context. We were both at NSA. Sarah had a Uber booked. I was waiting for mine and she just said, do you want to get in an Uber? Do you want to share an Uber? I said, sure. I canceled mine. And on the ride, how long was it? Like 8 minutes to Albuquerque Airport, we connected. We engaged. There was obviously something there. And here she is, a few months later on my podcast. So I just think there's opportunities always if you can look for them and you are open to exploring.
I love that. And I feel like you're not giving yourself enough credit, because also it was an 8-minute ride. So it was very short, and you're such an engaging and warm person. So there's that, but it was like 4 a.m. It was so early, and you were still this wonderful person to meet. And I think we both travel a lot, and I recognized your expression of like, I need to be at the airport right now and my Uber is not coming, as you're like looking into the glow of your phone. So
the panic. Yeah. I was probably half asleep. I don't know if you got that as engaging or she's still in REM.
Engaging for sure.
Well, thank you. Well, I'm delighted to have you on, and I congratulations on your TED Talk.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's really a big milestone, and we're going to include that in the show notes for sure. But why don't you just start with some backstory and understand you have a PhD. So, I have a BSc, which was a big thing for me. If someone said keep going, I would have been like, no, I'm good.
Well, I have to preface, I've I'm a school nerd. And before someone like turns the podcast off, like, oh, I don't know if I want to listen to the book nerd. I promise you, I keep it hidden, but I'm a huge nerd. I've always loved school. And I always knew that I wanted to get my PhD. I mean, from like an embarrassingly young age, I knew that I wanted to go as far as I could in school. And my big dream, my goal was I was going to be in academia. I was going to be an academic. I was going to be a professor of some sort. And as journeys sometimes wonderfully do, mine ended up quite differently. I was in graduate school. I was getting my master's, and I was a TA. So I was a teaching assistant, as so many graduate students are, and I was teaching my own class, which was terrifying because I was barely older than some of the undergraduates. And they don't really give you much teaching prep when you're going to be a TA. They just hope that you know the curriculum material and kind of throw you in. Luckily, I did fall in love with it, and I sought out a bunch of resources related to teaching. And then they moved my class online. And this was like years and years ago, before classes were commonly online. This was early days of online. And I was voluntold. I was like the youngest TA. And they were like, well, you go online. I was devastated. I loved teaching. I loved connecting with the students. I was teaching technical writing to engineers, so it already wasn't their favorite class, but I won them over in the classroom. So I move online, and I end up falling in love with it. I get this amazing opportunity to connect with students and provide them with a wealth of resources that they can more customize to their background and experience. So I fell in love with it. I switched my graduate program. I changed. I changed my degree to study instructional technology because of how much I fell in love with the online format. So that's my PhD is in curriculum instruction with a focus on instructional technology. So I was a huge nerd, really interested in e-learning, and I got that degree in 2018. And I don't know what kind of fairy godmother I had looking out for me that was like, let's get this girl an instructional technology degree in 2018. It ended up really helping me. I started my own company a couple years before that, focused on e-learning. The PhD gave me a lot of credibility, and I was able to just completely pull away from academia and become an entrepreneur. And it was a wonderful ride, and I built a wonderful business that supported me and my young family in a really cool way. And I'm just really thankful for everything I learned from it.
That's so amazing. What a great journey. And you know what? A bit of luck sprinkled in there. And your fairy godmother threw a pandemic in that, that didn't hurt either.
Oh gosh, when you phrase it that way, I realize I need to be really careful saying it that way, because certainly that was not anything we wanted sprinkled anywhere. But I am really lucky that I had that background at a time when it ended up being really, really needed.
Yeah, no, I think it's great because I can say that I actually got certified in virtual training in 2017 when I was on maternity leave.
We have the
And
same fairy godmother.
was her name Greta?
I'm fine with that. I love it. Cheers to you, Greta.
And I remember it was an 8-day, like, full session, and I was like, I'm on mat leave, I got time." And I remember being so skeptical going, like, "You can't recreate, what in
Yes,
person does."
that's how I
And I
was.
remember leaving, and we had people from Florida, we had people from Germany, and I was almost crying, like, graduation day because I had such connection, and I'm like, "Oh my god, when done right, it does work." And so I was converted as well, before all of this, before we
Yes.
actually needed it.
Yeah. Isn't
Yeah,
amazing? I love
that's
that we have that in
amazing.
common.
Yeah, well, I feel now people use it as an excuse and they're like, "Oh, you can't do it." I'm like, "Well, that's just lazy." Like I can most of my customers I have never met in person. And when we do, they're like, "We've" one of us will say, "We've never met." And we're like, "Oh, but the connection is still there." So I think you can definitely build trust. Yes, there's a layer of technology, but there's techniques, there's nuances, and there's a desire also to want to create that connection. I think if you don't have the desire, a lot of the skills and the approach are just kind of you're operating at half mass.
That's beautifully said, and I think relates to one of the themes that I love about your podcast. I'm a huge fan of your podcast.
Oh, thank you.
Coming from academia and then going into entrepreneurship, I did not see myself as an entrepreneur. I
Yeah.
was very scared of that term, and I definitely didn't see myself as a salesperson. I mean, that was huge for me, and I would say things like, "Oh, I'm not a salesperson. I'm not a salesperson." And of course, you are. I mean, I think we all are. I
Mhm.
think if you somebody told me once that you should only be able to call yourself someone in sales if your livelihood relies on what you're able to bring in,
Mhm.
like what you can sell.
Mhm.
And I remember thinking, well, isn't that really kind of true for all of us?
Yeah.
Like, aren't all of our livelihoods based on what we're able to do? So I don't think that that's necessarily a barrier, and certainly as an entrepreneur, you're in sales. And so it took me a while to come around to that. And your podcast highlights so many of the themes that helped me come around to this idea, from that switch of like selling yourself to realizing that it's helping, like reframing that as helping people to understand the problems you can solve. And then what you were just saying about e-learning and the connection. I think what's so cool about what we both shared with e-learning is this awareness of like, yes, it's not the same, but it can do some really amazing things if you work at it and you can foster those connections. I think the same is true in sales, whether it's virtual or in person.
Yeah, and that just ties back to Daniel Pink's book, To Sell is Human, where we're all selling, and it's I think in your personal life, like if you're trying to, as a family, watch a movie, like there's an element of influence and persuasion in everything we do.
That
You
is
know?
so true. As someone, I'm the only girl in my household. I have two sons, my husband, and it is just Marvel movies all the time.
Yeah,
So I have to keep my skills pretty brushed up if I want to try to argue for something different.
absolutely. And I think what you said there, Sarah, is just about learning. Taking away some things from the podcast, which is great that you're doing that, and also the e-learning is part of it is being open. And I feel that people are often maybe well, you tell me, maybe there's a lack of awareness that there could be a better way, and we're just, we're happy being comfortable and safe, and or maybe listening to the message we're hearing, and it's actually not us. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I think something that I hear a lot with e-learning and folks that aren't comfortable with e-learning, and I think this translates well to what we're talking about sales too, is just this idea that like, oh, it can't be the same, or it's not going to be good enough. And I relate it to PowerPoint. And I love this metaphor. You get people all the time who are like, I hate PowerPoint slides. And I think that's so funny because PowerPoint in itself is just this blank canvas. Like that
Hmm.
would be like saying you hate a canvas. Like
Yeah.
it's not anything. It's this tool. And I think the reason we hate PowerPoints is because how PowerPoints are so wonderfully abused. I mean, they
Yeah.
just become, the bullet points or the paragraphs of text or these templates that people fill in without really thinking about their audience. E-learning is a similar canvas. And I would even argue sales is a
Yeah.
similar canvas, right? There
Hmm.
are templates, there are scripts, there are, best practices that aren't really best for anybody. And of course, if people are following those without really thinking about their audience, without really investing in either the purpose or the why, that was something in your April solo episode that I loved so much when you were talking about going slow to go fast. And you were like, foundationally, we have to connect to this purpose and this why. When we're missing all those things, then we hate the format. But what we're hating is the canvas. And
Mm.
so if we can go back and have those foundational things, then the canvas can be really beautiful. And so I think it's less about hating the tool, whether it's the PowerPoint or the idea of like hating sales or hating virtual learning. It's really about whether that foundational interest in the audience and the audience's goals and in the purpose is there.
And I think when you have that, you break out from the noise because, like you said, e-learning is commoditized and best practice. Everyone is saying, "Oh, here's my 5 step, my 7 step," and you're just like, "What one do we listen to?"
Oh gosh, I just rolled my eyes like a teenager. I'm so sorry. That was a little extreme, but yes, that really hit a chord.
But like you said, when you can break apart from that and you can really connect with your audience and also know foundationally why you're doing this, and it's a genuine desire to help. Maybe you were in their position before that your message doesn't come across as salesy. It's just like there's a passion there. There's like something burning in there that's like, I got to get this out because I was you. I know it sucks, and now I've developed something that will make it unsuck. And that's the difference between the other folks that pull out their PowerPoint and their slides, and they're the typical, "Let's go through my 10-step program," and you're like, "You and 900 other people."
Yes, 100%. And that's one of the things that, when I work with entrepreneur, I get a chance to work with all different kinds of groups. One of the groups that I work with is entrepreneurs. And I warn them about these templates for this very reason. They have this passion, this reason that they got into this and said, oh, 401k, not for me. Let me go out on my own. There was something there that they wanted to start.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to try to shove it into some template. I mean, you
I
got to
know.
start where that spark is.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting, and we could do a whole nother episode about this, but I think people dilute passion because they're afraid it's going to be mistaken for like amateurness, or even like someone who's not mature enough, like a certain amount of immaturity. Like if I'm so excited and I want to tell you about this thing, oh my gosh, are you going to think I'm like a crazy pushy salesman? Are you going to think that I'm inauthentic? And what I try to remind entrepreneurs is you're not going to be everyone's cup of tea. Not
Mm-hmm.
everyone likes tea. I have this saying that I say a lot, and it's not everyone likes Tom Hanks.
Mm-hmm.
Tom Hanks, like the most like, he's Woody in Toy Story. Like he's an American icon. He's a gem. And there are people who like actively hate Tom Hanks.
Mm-hmm.
So there are people who don't like Tom Hanks. Like what chance do the rest of us have?
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to be universally liked. We're not going to be everyone's cup of tea. Not everyone even drinks tea.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not about diluting your passion so that you're palatable to everyone. Keep that passion. Make sure that you're communicating in a way that people can understand the problem that you solve, sure.
Mm-hmm.
But keep the passion. And there might be some folks who that's not their jam, but there are going to be people who do relate to it. And they're going to relate to that spark that you have. And so rather than diluting it and fitting yourselves into these like templates and best practices and scripts and whatever ChatGPT says you should put, focus on that spark. Start there.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And even what it came to me there, Sarah, is, dimming our light to make other people okay with theirs, because a lot of time when you have that passion, like that's your point of view, that's your differentiator. And if you have to shrink that or play small because the folks you surround yourself with are making them feel uncomfortable, like you need to step outside of that because you need to play big.
1,000%. I wish I could like double click on that. I don't even know the right phrase. I love that so much. And I think that was really hard for me to learn early in my career because, and again, I mean, I just want to spotlight women here. I think many of us are told that we're a lot, right? Or that,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you remember the barrage of ads that we were getting on LinkedIn for a while about executive presence. Do you remember all the courses we could take on executive presence? You can enroll in this course and get executive presence. And there was always like this clip arty image of this really successful, amazing woman in like stilettos. And she looked like what you want to look like. She flies first class, like, of course I want to be here. So of course I must need executive presence. I am way too messy and sparkly and energetic. I don't have executive presence. Let me enroll in this course and get some. No, we are so much better as ourselves than trying to be the template, the script of someone else. And we may not be perfect, but one of the best illusions I've ever heard is the perfect butterfly is the one at the museum with like the push pins in the wings. And it's preserved there and it's captured there. And yeah, it's perfect, but it's behind glass.
Mm.
That's not the one that people are going to relate to.
Mm.
I would much rather be outside of the museum without anything in my damn wings.
Yeah.
So it's, getting to that place in your career. And it does take some, I think I've heard use this phrase too, inner work, but getting to that place where you're more okay with being this messy or sparkly or whatever version of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And figuring out a way to elevate that version of yourself versus trying to be something else. That's just such a pivotal point in your career. And I would argue maybe more crucial to sales than any other field.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. And what I see a lot of is people not wanting to stand, like it's almost this push pull. They're like, I wanna pull ahead, but I'm afraid to share my point of view because I might get backlash. And for me, I'm all about the polarizing message, because when you say something that's polarizing, you're attracting 80% of the people who agree or are in line with that. The 20% that don't, they've actually done you a favor, because these are not my people, this is not my tribe. But when people are playing it safe and they're using neutral language, guess who they're bringing on board with them? Nobody. And so take a stance. What's your point of view? And even if people don't agree with it, like part of it is that's your story. Like, and you just need a small piece of the pie. But I think that you spread yourself so to everybody. And it's like, God, what do you actually stand for? Like, what angle, what perspective do you take? Because that's what companies are looking for when they're like, I need somebody who's really, challenger focused or not afraid to ask difficult questions and can really get to the root cause. God, Sarah posts a lot on that. Like, you're known for that or whatever that is, but be known for something or you're going to just blend in with the background.
And I hear it all the time from folks they'll say, like, well, who's going to be as interested in that as I am? Like, I need to be more general so that it can appeal to
Mhm.
everyone. Like, that's one.
Mhm.
Or B, the other one is they try to change their language, like you said, to kind of dim to where the people around them are. They're
Yeah.
really excited about something,
Yeah.
but they feel kind of silly being so excited about it when the people around them kind of aren't.
Mhm.
And both of those are just such dangerous mistakes. I love the folks who put that flag in the ground and say, this is what I talk about. And you're thankful for when you get to that level, you are thankful for every unsubscribe because that means
Totally.
you're
Shrinking.
narrowly right. I did a TEDx recently, as you pointed out, and I got a negative comment the other day, and my
Oh.
husband, like from across the room, like we high fived because that meant that my
Yeah.
TEDx was getting a wider reach.
Yeah.
It was more than just like my friends and family,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
there are people who don't know me and I guess don't like me, and so we kind of high fived, like, all right, I got a negative comment. It's gonna keep meandering around and
Mhm.
finding different people. And the fact that someone didn't like it isn't a negative thing. That means I put myself out there. And clearly that person's just not for me. So
Totally.
such a shift. And I will say, and I kind of want to ask you what you think about this. Something I always remember to tell folks when I talk about this is it doesn't mean that the sting goes away.
Mhm.
Like, I don't want people to hear this and think that you and I are like, immune to, like, that we have some kind of shield or something
Yep.
against the emotions. You still feel it
Yep.
if you feel like a message didn't resonate or you get this negative comment. It doesn't feel good. The cool thing that you do is you learn to do it anyway. You
Yep.
learn to keep going.
Yep.
It's not about not feeling that. It's I feel that stings a little bit, but I'm going to keep going.
Absolutely. I think that's the biggest part is a lot of time and that's, failure is it's only failure or a mistake if you don't learn from it. And so I think, hey, I get the sting all the time. Sometimes that sting is a $50,000 sting. It's not pleasant. But what it does is in reflection, I'm like, that was the greatest thing that happened to me because it forced me to play big. And now I'm attracting big contracts, big accounts, big whatever because of that sting. So the sting is actually, I say thank you because my approach is different. I'm different as a result of it. And I think it's needed. One thing you said is in that negative message, people don't like me. I would say they don't like your message. They don't dislike you. It's your message didn't resonate. And like you said, if you think about like a lane, thank you, not in my lane, you've trimmed it away. And I don't, that's good because you now are getting more clear and you're like that laser beam going, okay, I can see the boundaries of my target audience now. I was kind of a little wavering a little bit here. Now I know, no, these are straight lines down here and these guys aren't included. So that's good.
That's great. And I'm so glad you pointed that out because I do think many of us have a tendency to take it personally. And I
Hmm.
know I still do.
Yeah.
And so whatever language I used there was probably authentic to my thinking, like, oh,
Yep.
well, they must not like me. But that's not necessarily it. And I have so many examples of turned down proposals or conversations that didn't go well, that
Hmm.
were just a no, not right now, that
Yes.
ended up being a yes
Yeah.
later. And so it's really important that we don't frame it as something that's personal to us. One, because it protects us a little bit more.
Totally.
Like, okay, you didn't like my idea. That
Totally.
doesn't necessarily affect me and who I am. But then two, because just because someone's saying no to something right now, that means it's not a good fit right
Hmm.
now. And there's a lot of worth in continuing to cultivate those relationships because we never know when it's going to be a fit down the road.
Absolutely. Like timing is everything. And I think for me, where I've developed, and that is, I have been in sales for 25 years. So in my earlier career, I would come home crying and going, I totally screwed up. And I would personalize it. And then as I got more experience and I would, go for a run or add some activity, I'm like, that had nothing to do with me. That jerk had a bad day and he took it out of me. And then I was mad. I was like, who do you think you are? Like, I'm not a punching bag for you. But I could clearly see. So even now, what I found out was I turned, I guess, from anger into empathy. And now I'm like, oh, you must have had a really bad day. And I could completely disassociate with it and see, but I had to go through like I took it totally personal. But when you've been doing it for so long and you've got this thick shell, you're like, I can't. Like, I can see very clearly this has nothing to do with me. Even now, if someone like those bad comments, sometimes I'm like, that's just a mirror on you not being able to do, like, you're upset at yourself because you're not doing something and you're taking it out on me. And I can see that. Could I initially? Absolutely not. I was a victim and I took it very personally. But now I'm like, it's nothing to do with me. It's all about you.
1,000%. And I wonder what the secret is, because we've talked about our kids. I mean, if I could give my kids any gift,
Yeah.
it would be that bottled up. This ability to see someone else wronging you or treating you badly as more of a reflection of them
Mhm.
than a reflection of you.
Mhm.
But I think the only way that I learned that was through experience, by observing someone treating me poorly and then learning the
Mhm.
behind the scenes, learning that it actually had nothing to do with me,
Yeah.
or seeing someone who I thought, oh my gosh, they must have really hated my idea. They must have thought I was so dumb, da da da. And then they come back 6 months later and want an even bigger proposal because now it's the right
Yeah.
time. I think that evidence really stacked
Yes.
up for me and changed it. So even though I'd love to bottle that, for my kids and for some of the early career folks I work with, I think some of it is just the experience and maybe hearing from mentors who can help you reframe it, or loved ones. I have a story about this where early in my career, I would get emails sometimes where I thought people were angry, like I thought they were angry at me, and I would read them to my husband, and I'd be like, "Oh, you're never going to believe what Steve said. Listen to this. Hi, Sarah," and I would start like
You
that, and
you had that sarcastic
and
tone.
he would say, "Do you know that they wrote it in that?" Like I was doing like a dramatic reading of how I felt, Steve, and that was actually really helpful
Yeah.
to say out loud the voice that I thought they were using, and realizing how much of my own drama I was putting into that. That was a really helpful lesson. We still crack up about that.
But I think honestly, Sarah, that's the story. That's a narrative we hear in our heads. And just to take it back to what you said, like, how can we teach others? Like, the word you used was evidence. Like, I think you need to look. This is where reflection is so powerful. And just think back and say, like, what is evidence that they came back to me 6 months later? Obviously, I did do a good job, but I started listening to the story I was playing in my head, because I do that with my kids and I use examples. I say, remember when that kid said that to you? Why do you think he said that? And he will say, or she'll say, probably because they're not as good as a baseball player as I am, or something like that. And I said, so by putting you down, what does it do to them? And they're like, it makes them feel better. I said, absolutely. That's so when you can reframe it in an example that actually happened, you're showing them evidence. I think it's easier to show it to someone else than to look at our own, because we are too emotionally connected with it, right?
And you mentioned earlier a way that you can do it on your own, which is a bit of space. And then I think physical activity, or if physical activity isn't a possibility, it's something that allows you to, whether it's breath work or whatever it is. You mentioned going on a run.
Yeah.
I think that physical space, or just some time
Yep.
space, or some mind space, whatever you want to call it. And I know we're all very different creatures, so finding out what works for you is a really important part of that. But then once you figure that out, using that as space. So that's one way that you can do it individually. But then I think what you're touching on here, in the way that we talked about evidence and maybe a mentor or a parent helping
Mm-hmm.
you see it from a different perspective, having someone to ask that crucial question of, well, how do you know that to be true?
Mm-hmm.
That's usually, I think mentors and coaches are so important. And I say the term coach, which is a loaded term right now. And there are some wonderful coaches out there. I've worked with some coaches. I don't just mean the certified coaches, though. Certified coaches are very important. But I think of a coach as anyone who's on the
Yep.
sidelines and can critique the work that
Totally.
you're doing. And so a mentor or a coach who can help lead through those conversations is just so important. We all need one, or a couple.
And even if, like, I am in so many accountability groups and women mentor groups, but I just think someone like helping you see your blind spots, because I can do it for other people because I'm not emotionally connected and I am a coach. But sometimes it's like, well, there's a landmine right in front of you. I'm like, oh, where? I don't see any landmine.
I don't know. It's so funny. I
Kaboom.
I have coached folks before, and I am not a certified coach, but coached folks on things that I have a skill set or background in. So I've presenting and speaking is really big for me. So I've done some coaching for that, and I have given folks advice and been able to critique them and support them. And then, a couple months later, I will run into the same issue and I will need someone else to
Yeah.
tell me the thing that I told someone else. A lot of times it's not that we don't know it. And I think this is such a crucial reminder today. We're in the information age, we're in the AI age. The information, the knowledge is not always the gap. We know these things to be true.
Mhm.
It's putting them into practice.
Mhm.
And putting them into practice requires us to have some kind of feedback loop. And sometimes we can do it for ourselves, but the greatest athletes in the world, the most talented musicians, the most celebrated artists, they all have mentors and coaches, and for a reason. You need to have that feedback loop, and it's really difficult if that feedback loop is always yourself.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I think I agree. I do agree, and I do think I'm working on myself just getting better at taking my foot off the gas, stepping out, and just really reflecting and seeing things for what they are, because a lot of times we like to paint a picture and tell a story that's not true, and the longer you're on your own, the louder the story gets. But when you can surround yourself with a group of people, they can call you on your stuff and be like you said, how is that true? Or tell me, is there evidence to support that? Like, be a lawyer. Is it what is evidence? And you're like, I call bullshit on
I love it
myself.
so much. And I love what you said. If we're alone with our thought on it too long, it
Yeah.
just gets bigger and bigger. And you might not be surprised to hear this, since I already revealed myself as a book nerd who knew from a very, very early age that her goal in life was to go really far in academia. But I'm an introvert. I know, surprise of the century. So I need a lot of alone time to recharge. And the work that I do is what I jokingly call like using your phone with the flashlight on. It drains my battery.
Mhm.
And so I do need a lot of time to recharge.
Mhm.
But, or I should say, and
Good, yeah.
I need to make sure that I am not alone in my circle for too long,
Mhm.
because man, even though I need it to recharge, I have to be careful that I don't use that as an excuse to not get that external feedback and
Mhm.
to not have those conversations that will help me to reframe and reflect and all of those things. And it's
Mhm.
a balance.
I think that's amazing and great awareness for you in what you do need, because you can easily fall back into the safe and hiding almost.
I love how you called it awareness. Someone asked me the other day, we were doing some fun networking questions, and one of the questions was, if you could swap lives with anyone in the world, who would you swap lives with? And my first thought was, are you kidding? It's taken me so long to figure out how to operate this thing. And I'm like gesturing to myself. It has taken me decades to figure out like my brain, my body, my mind, right? I mean,
Mhm.
so much of work is figuring out how you work. And I
Mhm.
don't care if it's a Myers-Briggs, I know I've heard that called like the astrology of career development, or the Colby or the DISC assessment. And I say this all the time. I don't care if it's the BuzzFeed quiz on what kind of ramen noodle you are. I
Mhm.
genuinely, anything you can do that will help you better understand who you are, what your skills are, what your likes and dislikes are, what your values are, the kinds of things that light you up, the kinds of things that drain you, how you recharge, kind of that awareness is just so important. And
Mhm.
it's not the same for everyone. It's really not. And so figuring that out for yourself is the most important work you can do, because it impacts everything else.
Mhm. No, I completely agree, and I talk a lot about that. So, Sarah, how would you transition that from the importance of figuring out who you are, your values, what's important to you, into the one pager that you do with your clients? Like, you start well. First of all, maybe tell us what the one pager is and why is it important, and then is that the starting point that you invite your clients to really look at, like that purpose, that real why question?
Yeah, thank you for this question. So I talk a lot about achievement, and I have an interesting background. We've talked a little bit. I'm an academic. I was trained to do research. I also spent a couple years as a business reporter, and I
Oh.
talk about this in my TEDx talk. So I spent a couple years as a business reporter and a podcast host, and it meant that I got to interview all these amazing, successful people. And what I don't talk about in the TEDx is how it blew my mind that these people were so incredibly normal. I think I
Yeah.
had them like on a pedestal.
Yeah.
I'm about to interview somebody who just got, X million of dollars in VC funding, or someone who invented this new technology and was awarded this patent, or the first Hispanic woman to reach this level in government leadership. And I'm just so nervous, and I'm thinking I'm going to talk to this perfect human. And instead, like, they're, late to the meeting, or they lost their car keys, or they have a funny story about how their kid threw a shoe. Like, just, they were so normal.
Yeah.
And it got me wondering, like, okay, if it's not that they're superhuman, if it's not that they were given some extra star in their DNA, then what is it?
Mhm.
How are all these people achieving? And so I began to really, like an academic, I began to really study it, and I noticed this pattern. And that's what I talk about in the TEDx talk, is this pattern of things that I noticed, that people who achieved really big things, like, okay, they're all kind of doing these core foundational elements, and man, we're really not taught this, and more people need to know it. But the most important thing I did was I fit it onto a single page,
Mm.
because the conversations I kept having, people are so overwhelmed. I mean, our world is just moving so quickly, and I think I kept having conversations with people who were working toward goals, or who were working toward goals, right? Like, they were
Mhm.
in that beginning phase where they were thinking about it. Should I do this? And people are just so overwhelmed, and they don't know where to start. And I was seeing a lot of paralysis or procrastination. And I thought, gosh, if I could just help people understand that they really don't need that much to get started, and that they can execute these foundational elements that they would have in common with the most amazing achievers that I've interviewed as a business reporter. Wow, that would be really powerful. And I was working with someone and kind of shared that wish, and he was basically like, "That would be really powerful. Why don't you go make that?" So I spent years developing a one-page tool, which is very ironic and funny. But that's what the TEDx is about: is not only can we follow this pattern that I recognized both in the literature and in these interviews with achievers, but also can we keep it to one page so that we can keep that focus in front of us and not be overwhelmed.
Mhm. And as an entrepreneur, I can say, and I still struggle with that, the shiny penny syndrome, or the squirrel, you're looking all over the place. And I like the one page because brevity is, it's, it's like a resume. It's like, if I everything's here, I don't have to keep going, because I think the longer it is, the more daunting. And then it's like, you know what, I'll start this later, because it's just, the brain is like, this is heavy and this is work. And it reminds me of, well, yeah, it makes it an easy no, but it reminds me of the saying, "It's the hardest part about going to the gym is," I think it was like opening the door or something like that. But basically, it's like getting your butt to the gym. It's not lifting the heavy weights. And I think, like anything, it's just getting started. So if you can make that, if you can simplify that, and then it's almost like I can see, it's like that screen of the preview screen on an email. I can see what's expected of me here, and I'm not afraid of it. I'm not going to run away from it, because I can see what's around the corner. Therefore, I'm going to minimize the excuses that I've done in the past.
1,000%. And we have so much research to back up what you and I are talking about here, right? Like, we know that it's really important to take a big goal and to break it down
Mhm.
into steps. We know that. We know that it's really important that if we are procrastinating or we are feeling that paralysis, we set a short timer, right? You don't
Mhm.
want to go for an hour run. Okay. Well, will you run for 30 minutes? No.
Mhm.
Okay. Will you run for 15? And then whatever, even if it's 2 minutes, as long as you get started. And then
Mhm.
once you're on the treadmill or outside, you usually end up running from. It's just about getting. So we have all this beautiful research to help back this up, which really inspired me as I was developing this one page. But what also really kept me going, I mentioned earlier, I've worked with a lot of entrepreneurs. When you started out as an entrepreneur, or when you've worked with others, I wonder if you've encountered this too. We were given so many templates. We're back to templates from the beginning of our episode. We're given so many templates for, create a 5-year business plan, da, da, da. And I saw so many entrepreneurs get almost stopped in their tracks
Mhm.
by these binders of create a 5-year business plan. And so many of them got that binder, couldn't finish it, and said, well, I guess I'm not supposed to be an entrepreneur.
Mhm.
I must not care enough about this. I must not be business minded enough. I must not know enough. This is way too big. I can't do this. So the dream dies before it's even started. And it just killed me to think about all the wasted potential, the products and services that we don't have access to because people's goals got stopped before they were started.
Mhm.
And I wanted to do something about it. And the one page plan felt like a thing that I could give to the world to say, look, if you really want something, then our world deserves to have it. Our world will be a better place with that thing that you're excited about in it. So here's an easy way to get started, because the worst thing that could happen is you don't start, you don't try.
Mm-hmm. And that's your passion coming out right there. You're not dimming lights for anybody because you're giving because you did like, I think it's very sad if an entrepreneur is deterred from starting because the overwhelm of the process. And if you actually pull apart a business case or business plan, you're like, you know what, did I really need all that stuff anyways? Because it's kind of like Salesforce. Like, I'm going to fill out whatever because you're asking me to. It's not real, but just to compliance and check a box. And it's like, how many entrepreneurs, I'm not saying wing it. I'm definitely not saying that. You have to do product market fit. You have to do tons of information, but like, you don't have to kill yourself. Like, you don't have to, like, a lot of it is build the plane as you're flying it. So many people have developed this product and it's perfect. And then their prospect goes, do you have it in pink? And they're like, oh, no. And I'm like, get it 80%, get it out there, start asking questions, talk
And then
about it,
start asking,
and bring it back.
1,000%. I think I love the way you just put it, because it's another downside. One downside to the templates or the formidable binder is, okay, people's dreams are crushed. They can't get through it. The other is, what if you like the planning and you're like, well, I'm going to tinker away here safely. I'm going to build the best business plan that's ever business planned. It's going to be the most beautiful, frameable, award-winning business plan. And that just does nothing for you. If you had made a 5-year business plan in 2019, how much of that would have been relevant even a year later? So I don't want someone to hear this and say, okay, great, I'm going to quit my job tomorrow with no plan.
Yeah.
that's not the message. But the message is, it's so much more of an experiment than you think. And so please feel permission to try. Write that bad first draft, record that okay first episode, because the only way you're going to get to an amazing chapter 27 is by writing chapter 1. Like, you need to start, because you're going to learn so much along the way. And so if you don't start, you're missing out on that learning and that experimentation, and later you is going to really need that. So it's not to say we don't need to be planning. It's to say we shouldn't let the planning be a barrier, and we shouldn't let the planning be a playground where we just kind of spend our time. We need to get out there and do the rocket fuel stuff.
I love what you said there. A few things I would just want to pull apart is build your first, I think you said, like, bad first draft. And, but knowing it will suck. Like, if you do something for the first time you've never done, guess what? You're going to suck. But knowing that, it's not like I'm going to go in there and like be amazing. I'm not. But knowing that is half the battle, because I think your ego is not going to be crushed that much, but you're also setting expectations. So that's huge. I like the word experimentation because it's almost like there's less risk. Like, it's less, I don't know, it doesn't feel so failure-ish. It's like, I'm experimenting, and in experiments you have a hypothesis, but you test it to see if you're right or wrong. So it neutralizes any bad feelings that you could attach if it does go bad.
100%. I love that you love the experiment phrase, because that's a big one for me. I try to reframe everything as an experiment.
Language is important.
Language is important, and it helps. You said it. You said it takes that fear, or even whatever our brains would assign to that thing, whatever value it would assign. If you call it a product launch, then there could be a failure. If you call it an experiment, then there's only the opportunity to learn and to tweak. And again, I got to go back to what we said earlier. It's not to say that the emotion goes away. Do I like doing a bad first draft? I told you earlier, I'm an academic. I want an A+ in all things. I'm the one who goes through the TSA line, and I want them to tell me that I'm the best person who walked through security that day. Like, I drive my family nuts. I would love the A+ in the sticker. And I know that I'm not going to get anywhere if I hold back and don't release things until I think that they're perfect. And so bad first draft is really important to me. It's also, I mentioned, I started out as a technical writing instructor for engineers. And one of the most powerful lessons I tried to share with them is, it is really hard to say what you need to say and sound good at the same time. So write it down as a bad first draft and then edit it. Those are two different processes. And so bad first draft is such a mantra. If I was going to have a tattoo, maybe it would be something related to bad first draft. I think for any big experiment, anything you want really badly, whether it's your podcast or your YouTube channel or your book or your art or your leadership, I think what bad first draft can mean is I'm still going to do the highest quality that I can,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm recognizing that I'll learn and get better along the way. So it's not being okay with a poor product. It's saying I have to start and I'm going to learn along the way. And I think, to talk about sales, people respond to that. People like that.
Totally. And what you said before is giving yourself permission. And I think giving yourself permission to write a first draft, for me, it allows yourself to be scrappy, to be vulnerable, to be creative. Because knowing I'm going to make this, like, let's get all this stuff out now. That if you had these harsh expectations, you're like, well, I'm going to just tell people what I think they want to hear, and you're just given the boring stuff that everyone's. But if you're like, this is going to be crumpled up anyway, why don't we just
Yeah.
throw in when I got arrested?
You know what this makes me think of is when I was writing my TEDx talk. So a lot of people don't know this, but when you submit a TEDx, a request to do a TEDx, and it's different for each TEDx event. Every event has its own flavor, but you submit your title and your description, what you want to talk about. But then once you get in, you have time to kind of write what the talk will be. And the event that I was in paired me with a really wonderful coach. And I'll just never forget, I had a meeting with her and she was like, bring me a TEDx talk. It doesn't have to be the TEDx talk, but come ready. And so I wrote one and I cared about it a lot and it was terrible. It was really bad. But the process of writing it helped me to learn, like, okay, so this ain't it, but here's what worked about it, here's what didn't. And I'm going to tell you something that's, I don't know if this is embarrassing or not. I wrote seven different, and I don't mean like I outlined, like I wrote and delivered to this coach 7 different TEDx's until I got the final one. And the final one is just everything I wanted it to be, but it would not exist without those other 6.
I mean, that's trial, that's iteration, right? And what did you learn about yourself, Sarah, going through those 7 iterations?
That's such a good question. I care a lot about my audience, and when I'm nervous, I put a lot of flash into my talks because I'm afraid that I'm not enough. And this is getting a bit vulnerable, but if it's an academic audience, I'll throw in all the data. If it's an audience that is kind of more the public, you're meant to be more entertaining, I throw in story after story, and it's like really embellished, and I'm going for the laugh to the point where it's like, is she trying to be a stand-up comedian? And what is this talk even about? And that was so interesting for me to learn that when I went through those iterations and got to talk number 7, and there were some wild ones in there. I had one that was written like a children's book. It like kind of rhymed. It was ridiculous. What I did through that process was strip away the flash and get to like, what is the core message? And I need to trust this message enough to believe that someone will listen to this without it rhyming, without it having stand-up comedy. Like, I need to be brave enough just to show up with this message. No armor, no flash, but this thing that I believe in. And that was lucky number 7.
I love that. I love that you use the word brave too. It just reminded me of Brene Brown. I was talking about her this morning. But you know what I was thinking about? I'm preparing for this talk on Friday, and I was out running again. That's where I get my inspiration on the weekend. And I just thought about my own life and in general, that when you get something too easy and you haven't worked for it, like you don't learn. This is why I think failure is so important, because you have to go through the iterations for you. You have to understand, why am I adding layers of flash? Like, what is it about me? And I think if you were to get it on the first one, you just wouldn't have that awareness and that real connection. And I always say, be an observer of yourself and to know why you're doing something, to know, how to get in front of it, and to get not put yourself in these situations. But I think you got to learn about yourself. And if you get it too easy, you don't get that.
You miss that opportunity to learn. And that's going to bring us back to this conversation of mentors and coaches, because I mentioned I was working with a TEDx coach when I did all these iterations, and I delivered that first TEDx. And the first thing she said, you can tell that you have experience as a speaker. You delivered that really well. Like, she mentioned that. And the reason I call that out is because I'm to this point in my career where I can kind of hide behind that. Right. And so I performed it. I to spice it up. So I made it really engaging. And she had the wherewithal to say, I think you're covering the message too much. And so how beautiful is that if I had presented it to someone else and they had said, man, you're a really good speaker, that's going to be great, I
Yeah.
can't wait to see it, would I have gone through and done all those other iterations if I had somebody who wasn't willing to give me the level of critique that I was requesting in that moment? Now, do I want that level of critique from everyone? We could have a whole separate podcast about
Mm-hmm.
unsolicited advice, right? So it's not a blanket statement to say, hey, everybody go out and give your best criticisms. But I think as individuals who are putting ourselves out there and trying to do big things, it's important to recognize whether you have people in your corner who are going to tell you the truth and they're going to respect what you're trying to go after enough to tell you if they don't think you're there yet.
Mm-hmm. And I have people in my life that do that. But what would you say, Sarah, to the people who are afraid to even put themselves in that position for fear of what the coach mentor is going to say to them? They're just not prepared to hear. Like, how would you invite them to take that first step forward?
Yeah. Oh, well, first, I just want to give that person a hug. I mean, not to be too corny, but it's just so my personality. I get it. Like I am not judging that person from a place of perfection. I am sitting right next to them. I was shaking the first time I gave that TEDx to my coach. I have spoken on huge stages to hundreds of people, and yet virtually delivering a TEDx draft to a coach in the privacy of my home had me shaking.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the reason I want to give this person a hug is just to say, like, hey, this is hard. I know it's really hard, but how lucky are we to have something that we care this much about? There are people out there who don't. They haven't found the thing or had the opportunity to discover the thing that they care so much about. And yet here we are with nerves, sure, but it's almost like excitement because we care so much about this thing. Now, if it feels too big, and you feel like you're jumping off the Grand Canyon, what's a baby step we can put in the middle?
Mm-hmm.
Can you share this with a friend first and get some soft feedback? Can you talk to this mentor and tell the mentor how nervous you are to put this out there and say, I'm really nervous to show this. I would love your feedback, but please don't knock me down too hard because I am terrified. That
Mm-hmm.
is totally okay. So, just recognizing that those nerves they're hard, they're difficult. I'm not saying that they're wonderful, but it's also a sign that we really care about this thing. And
Mm-hmm.
how wonderful is that?
Mm-hmm. I think we said earlier is acknowledge them, but keep going. Like don't
Yes.
give in to them.
My favorite story to share about this, and I think you and I have talked about this, is the pool story where there's the little girl on the edge of the pool and she's really nervous to jump in. And her dad keeps saying, like, jump in, I'll catch you. And the daughter is like, I'm scared. And he's like, but I'll catch you. And she's like, but I'm scared. And this older woman is swimming by and she just kind of yells, just do it anyway. And the little girl's like, oh, like it didn't occur to her that she could be scared and do it. She thought she had to
Yes.
get over the fear first, and you don't. We do it scared. We do it terrified. We do it shaking if necessary, but we still do it anyway. And I have never regretted putting myself out there. And certainly I've fallen flat on my face before, but all of it has led to where I am. So, yeah, we do it scared.
I love that. And yeah, I think, I run towards fear now because I know there's a lesson in it. And I know that it's going to teach me something, but did I always do that? Absolutely not. And there's times I'm still learning. Like I'm not painting this, look at me, I've got it all figured out because I definitely don't. But I think you get braver every time. And also like when you're coaching others, and I always go back to like, you can't ask them to do something you're not prepared to do yourself. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely hold that mirror to myself and I'm like, don't you be a hypocrite. You get out there and you lean into your own fear and you are you flashing? Are you too flashy? What's going on there? Why are you adding too many flashes for you? So I got to do that as well, right?
Yep.
Uh,
1,000%. And I love that you're willing to say that.
well, I'm a product. I'm a work in progress. Like I'm always. You said you're an avid learner. Like I always say, there's ABC, always be closing, which I don't agree with, but I say ABL, always be learning. And I'm always learning about. That's why I love doing the podcast because about myself, about other people, about the industry, and I'm just like people are like, oh, sales is so hard. I'm like, but it's not. It's human psychology. It's just don't be a jerk. Like how do you want to be treated? Like, it's basic human skills.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting that you're talking about things that would have terrified me early in my career. Putting yourself out there, running toward fear, sales in general, all of it early in my career would have just terrified me. And what I would love for someone to take away from this, if they also still experience some fear related to those things, is the idea that it's like a muscle, and
Mm-hmm.
it's really hard to start a new workout or to start a new routine or to take on something new. It's just hard. What I would hate for someone to think is, oh, this is hard, I guess it's not for me.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's hard for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard for everybody. I was a business reporter and I still struggle sometimes to write my newsletter. Like, it's just hard sometimes. That doesn't mean anything. Hard is hard. And so when I'm hearing you say, that you run towards fear, and that to you a lot of these sales concepts feel easy, I love that, and it's why I listen to your podcast, because you have all this awareness and expertise. And I think it's cool for folks to know, if they don't feel like they're there yet, they can be. It's not something you're born with.
Mm-hmm.
It's not some innate trait. And I learned this from interviewing all those completely normal
Totally.
people who achieve something really big. It's not something sparkly that got added to their DNA. It's something they practiced and learned and fell down and
Mm-hmm.
got lost and asked for directions. And the person who gave them directions gave them the wrong directions. So they got turned around again, but then they found the right mentor and they kept going. And then after the squiggly path, they got to where they needed to be. But none of it would have happened if they hadn't started in the beginning.
Mm-hmm. And I completely agree with that. And the alternative is regret. And would you rather live a life and saying, I wish I woulda, shoulda, coulda? I just think for me, that is not an option. I am way more willing to go through the discomfort of learning, of change, of failure, than going at the end of my life, going like, I had an idea and I never brought it to execution. Even as a parent, going like to my kids, like, mommy didn't do that. It's like, oh, yes, I did. And our conversation at breakfast table, the table was fly your freak flag. And I
Yeah.
and I
Love
go,
that.
what do you think that means? And one of them, they didn't know.
Yeah.
And then one of them was like, it's okay to be freaky. And I'm like, yeah. I go, if there's a box and everyone's thinking this way, because I just think of, that I know you're an academic, but like the traditional box thinking, I go, it's okay to like think out of that and be courageous. And I just think in sales in life, fly your freak flag. Like that's who's going to break through. And even if you're afraid to get started, like your freak is gonna be so different that that's gonna stop the scroll.
Yes. Yes. Oh, stop. I love that. And I think something that I also want people to hear from this is, like, they don't have to be me and you. Like, we're talking about our experiences with this. There's already a wonderful Karen Kelly in the universe, and she is unique, and we don't need another one. We
Yeah.
already have her. And so if someone's hearing this and thinking, oh gosh, well, I can't fly my freak flag and I can't jump in head first, that's just not me. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
It's not black and white. It's not a yes or no. It's, I'm interested in being an entrepreneur, but that feels really scary. Okay, well, how can you start?
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to quit your job, drop your 401k, and start on it tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
You can do it a little bit on the side, try it on the weekends, have conversations, join a co-working space on night and weekends. Like, there's so many little options in between. And that's what the mission of the one page was helping people to see. Even if your goal is a common goal, like writing a book or starting a business, things a lot of people want to do, it's so unique to you, because the only way you're going to achieve it is if you apply your unique skills, your unique strengths, where you are in life, and the community supporting you. And that's what I wanted people to see in the one page. I wanted it to almost be like a mirror, but that showed who they would be if they achieved this goal. And that they could keep it somewhere where they would see it, and it would remind them, so that when they logged into their computer on a Thursday at 1 p.m., they didn't just open their email.
Mm-hmm.
They knew what big thing they wanted to spend a little time working on. They didn't feel that paralysis. Mm-hmm. And so if you're listening to this and you're thinking, no, I couldn't do that, you absolutely could. But you're not going to do it like me. You're not going to do it like Karen. You're going to do it like you. That's the only way you're going to do it successfully. And so part of the challenge is just figuring out what that looks like for you, and having that permission to say, I'd rather start than it be perfect. And it's okay if nobody else recognizes it, because this is how I'm going to do this.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And for those listening, we will include, Sarah's been generous enough to allow us to include the template for the one page goal setting activity. And I'm excited to try it too, because I definitely teach brevity, but I'm always, as a learner, hey, I'm sure I can tighten things up as well. So I think it's great. I want to thank you, Sarah, for just sharing your your vulnerability, and just the fact that, yeah, none of us are perfect, but I think like someone said to me, "What's confidence?" And I just say it's a willingness to try, like to put yourself out there. And when you don't have that confidence, like looking at that one pager, and it shows you what's possible. Like, and then you look back at where you've failed in the past, but like where you've over time achieved it. So it's like it's possible. I've done it in the past. I just need to translate that into what I'm trying to do now. And so I think you really do help people see that, and the fact that you have a one pager will allow them to do it, because I feel like there's got to be some skin in the game to drive results.
It's I said earlier that bad first draft would be my tattoo, but I'm going to change it now.
Uh,
I'm going to change it to it's possible. And I just love the way that you said that. And I'm so grateful to you for giving me this chance to talk about it on your podcast. I mentioned I'm an avid listener. I loved so many of the episodes. If folks are listening and they didn't hear the one with Lori Richardson where she talked about the difference between like self-promotion and helping, oh, so good. So I'm just so excited that I got to come on as somebody who would never have called herself anywhere close to sales. And I got to bring this thing that I love so much, which is this idea that it's possible. And it's not possible because you're going to get this fairy godmother that we joked about earlier, or something magic is going to fall in place, but you can absolutely do this thing.
mm-hmm.
Whatever this thing is that you want, you can absolutely do it. And I guarantee you that in my years as a business reporter, I interviewed someone who made something that big happen with fewer resources than what you currently have. Because,
Mm-hmm.
man, in those interviews, I promise you, you have everything you need. You
Mm-hmm.
have everything you need to make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's just about carving out the path and seeing what it looks like. So please get started. Yes, please grab the template. It's totally free. Use it. Let me know how it goes, and if I can cheer you on in any way. I'm very easy to find on LinkedIn, so look me up, and I'm happy to share some cheer with you and what you're working on.
Oh, that's amazing. So yeah, where is the best way for people to connect with you, to follow you? We'll include your TED Talk, but is there a website, or apart from LinkedIn, is there another place that they can find you?
Yep. So you can go to saraglova.com. That's Glova. You can find me on Instagram, Dr. Sarah Glova. I share, in addition to my research, the ridiculous photos of me and my family having adventures. So happy to be there. And then, yeah, LinkedIn is just a wonderful platform. So very excited to connect with folks there. And somebody asked me the other day who I use to manage my social media. And I was like, oh, you're serious. It's me. So, it's me. So find me, tag me, comment, whatever it is, and I'll be right there to connect with you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I learned a lot. I really enjoyed our conversation. And like anything, just start, right? Just start, get out of your head, and just start. So thank you for sharing all the wisdom with myself and the audience. And for those who are tuning in, if you do apply her worksheet, please tag us in it. Let us know how it felt to get started, and what are some of the results you're already seeing from just picking up the pen. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time.